All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously spooky stuff today? We're tackling Gu, ancient Chinese black magic. And let me tell you, the source material you sent is wild. We're talking curses, venomous critters, and a whole lot of questions about what people believed back then.
Luckily, I've got our expert here to help us unpack it all.
Well, it's fascinating how the Chinese character for Gu itself gives us a glimpse into what we're dealing with. 3 insects over a sealed container. Talk about a visual metaphor.
Yeah, that's not exactly subtle, is it? So we're talking bugs, jars, and bad vibes. What kind of creatures were supposedly used in goo?
Well, the source mentions the usual suspects like scorpions and spiders, but it gets pretty creative. Snakes, lizards, even dogs are in the mix. Apparently, the more venomous, the better, although the insects seem to be the real stars. The larger animals might just be there to
Well,
make things more interesting, I guess.
it's like a toxic reality show in a jar. Survival of the most venomous. Okay, so we've got our creepy crawly cast. But how do you actually make do? I'm guessing there's more to it than just shaking them all up together.
You'd think so, right?
But no, there's a whole ritualistic process involved. The source stresses the importance of starting on the Dragon Boat Festival, sealing the creatures in a specific container, and following strict time frames. 49 days, 100 days, sometimes even a year. And get this, daily prayers are a must.
Daily prayers. That's where things get really interesting for me. It's not just about letting the creatures fight it out. There's this element of the Gu practitioner interacting with the container, almost like they're nurturing a pet.
That's a great observation. It suggests that goo isn't just some venomous concoction. It's believed to be a spiritual entity created through this whole process, a sort of manufactured spirit, like those spirit houses in Thailand, but way more intense.
Manufactured spirits. So not just DIY, but BioSCs. Build your own spirit. Okay, I'm officially creeped out. And with all these different creatures, I'm guessing there are different types of Go, right? Each with its own special side effect.
Absolutely. The source mentions snake goo, lizard goo,
Yeah.
which apparently goes by the much cooler name Kirin goo, and even dog goo, and brace yourself for this one, stone goo.
Wait, stone Go. Like a rock that can curse someone.
Well, the source claims that stronger, more venomous creatures make for stronger goo. So stone goo is technically possible, but pretty weak and ineffective. But the fact that even a rock could be seen as a potential spirit in this context really says a lot about the belief surrounding goo.
It's like they believed anything could be weaponized spiritually. Oh, okay, but let's get to the point. What's Goo supposed to do?
Well, the source suggests goo works primarily on a spiritual level, messing with someone's mind, luck, even their fortune. It's less about physical poison and more about spiritual sabotage.
But the source also mentions Goo causing intense pain, hallucinations, and even death. How could something spiritual inflict physical suffering?
That's the insidious part. The source describes goo as being practically undetectable by normal means. The victim seems to die from natural causes, but a goo master would know the truth.
So it's the perfect undetectable crime. Okay, we've got different types of Goo, each with its own terrifying effect. But is there a greatest hit when it comes to Goo curses?
Oh, definitely. The source dedicates a whole section to the Golden Cicada Gu, said to grant immense wealth at a terrible price.
Wealth and a terrible price. Sounds like every get-rich-quick scheme ever. Tell me more.
Well, it supposedly takes a full year to create, and it requires a mythical creature called a golden cicada, which already sounds sketchy, but here's the kicker. Anyone who possesses the Golden Cicada Gu is cursed with one of 3 fates: loneliness, poverty, or early death.
Hold on. You seek wealth through a curse that could make you poor or dead. It's like a cosmic prank. What were they thinking?
It does make you question the logic, doesn't it? But it gets even weirder. There's an ongoing cost to this Golden Cicada Gu. You have to feed it.
Okay, so a spiritual parasite with expensive tastes. What does this thing even eat?
Silk. Lots and lots of silk.
Silk. Seriously.
Yeah.
That's like the ultimate luxury item. It's almost as if it's mocking the very wealth it's supposed to bring.
It's a detail that makes you wonder about the deeper meaning behind this curse, isn't it? But there is some good news. There's a cure for this particular goo. The marrying off the golden cicada ritual.
You can marry off a curse. Okay, now I've heard everything. Tell me more.
So you put the goo, which is supposedly housed in the incense burner used to create it, in a box with some treasures. Then you leave it for someone else to find. The curse transfers to them, unless they know how to break it too.
So you might get rich, but you're just passing the buck. Or the curse, I guess. It's like a spiritual hot potato. What does that say about the whole idea of seeking wealth through goo?
It definitely adds a layer of moral complexity, doesn't it? But what's really intriguing is how this connects back to something the source mentioned earlier, the idea of money as a spiritual medium.
You mean the part about money being able to absorb and transfer misfortune? That sounds straight out of a horror movie.
It does, doesn't it? And the source links this idea to things like throwing coins in wishing wells or offering money at temples. Are those just everyday examples of mini-goo that we don't even realize we're practicing?
Okay, now you're making me rethink my entire approach to spare change. So if these beliefs about goo are as old as the characters themselves, does that mean there are still goo masters out there today?
It's definitely possible. While goo may not be as prevalent as it once was, the source seems to suggest the knowledge could still be passed down through generations.
So there could be people walking around right now who know how to inflict these curses. That's both terrifying and kind of cool in a morbidly fascinating way.
It certainly adds an element of mystery to our everyday lives, doesn't it? And speaking of everyday life, the source makes a rather unsettling claim about our own wishes and hopes.
You mean the part where they said our everyday desires could be considered unintentional cursing? That's a bit heavy, isn't it?
It is. It makes you think about the potential consequences of our desires, especially when those desires could negatively impact others. Are we all engaging in some form of low-level goo without even knowing it?
That's a thought-provoking question, and one I'll have to explore further. But for now, I think we need a moment to process all this information. We've covered a lot of ground in part one of our Go deep dive. We've explored the creation process, the different types of goo, and the unsettling idea that maybe, just maybe, they're all participating in a bit of unintentional cursing in our everyday lives.
And don't forget the Golden Cicada Gu, with its insatiable appetite for silk and its tendency to leave a trail of misery in its wake.
Right, because who needs happiness and companionship when you have mountains of silk?
Right.
But on that note, we'll wrap up part one of our deep dive into the world of goo. Be sure to join us for part two, where we'll delve even deeper into this fascinating, if slightly terrifying, subject.
We'll explore more stories from the source and unpack the cultural context of these ancient beliefs. Until then, keep your silk safely tucked away. And maybe think twice before you wish for something too extravagant. You never know what spiritual price tag might be attached. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of goo.
Yeah, that one really made me think. It's like, is wishing for good things bad if it could potentially bring harm to others? It's a whole ethical dilemma wrapped up in a fortune cookie. But let's get back to the source material. I'm really curious about this historical anecdotes about goo that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, the source is full of them. And they really paint a picture of how goo was perceived in ancient Chinese culture. For instance, there's a tale about a wealthy merchant who is rumored to have used goo to sabotage his rivals.
Ooh, a goo-powered corporate espionage story. Tell me more.
Well, the story goes that this merchant would secretly plant goo-infested objects in his competitors' homes, leading to all sorts of misfortunes that ultimately ruin them financially.
So it's like a mystical, hostile takeover. But instead of stocks and bonds, it's creepy crawlies and bad vibes. But how did they know it was goo? Couldn't it have just been bad business decisions?
That's the thing about goo. It supposedly worked in such subtle and insidious ways that it was almost impossible to prove, but in this case, the source suggests that the merchant's meteoric rise to wealth coincided with a series of very specific and unusual setbacks for his rivals, leading many to believe that something more than bad luck was at play.
Right when everyone around you is tripping over black cats and breaking mirrors, you start to wonder if someone's messing with your mojo. But what about the merchant? Did he get away with his goo-powered scheme?
Not so fast. The story claims that despite his newfound wealth, the merchant became increasingly paranoid and isolated, suspecting everyone around him of treachery. It seems his own greed and fear ultimately led to his downfall.
Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy. It seems even with goo, you can't escape the consequences of your own actions. What about those who were targeted? Any way for them to break the curse and recover?
Well, the story's a bit vague on the specifics, but it does mention that the merchant's rivals sought the help of spiritual practitioners, who performed counter curses and rituals to protect them.
So even in the face of something as insidious as goo, there was a belief that you could fight back with your own spiritual arsenal. Kind of inspiring. In a never give up hope kind of way.
Yeah.
Okay, what other gun tales did you unearth from the source?
There's a particularly dramatic one about a love triangle gone wrong. A woman, scorned by her former lover, was accused of using goo to get revenge. She allegedly sent him food laced with goo, causing him to become sick and experience disturbing hallucinations.
Oh, a vengeful ex with a penchant for poisonous cuisine. It seems even in ancient China.
Yeah.
Hell have no fury like a woman scorned, but what happened to the poor guy?
Well, the source says he became increasingly reclusive and erratic, consumed by paranoia and fear. Whether his affliction was truly caused by goo or simply a psychological breakdown is left ambiguous.
Right, so it could have been the goo.
Right.
Or it could have been a severe case of guilt and a bad breakup.
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing about these stories. It's hard to separate the supernatural from the psychological.
It really highlights how powerful the belief in goo must have been. If you believe that someone can curse you, it can have a profound impact on your mental and physical well-being, regardless of whether any actual magic is involved.
It's like the placebo effect. But for bad vibes?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to understand how deeply these beliefs were woven into their culture.
Exactly. Goo wasn't just a spooky campfire story, it was embedded in their worldview. The source explains that it reflected their understanding of the universe as this interconnected web, where actions in the physical realm could have spiritual consequences, and vice versa.
So like a cosmic butterfly effect,
Mm-hmm.
but with curses instead of hurricanes. How does that relate to goo specifically?
Well, it ties into the belief that everything, even inanimate objects, possessed a spiritual essence that could be manipulated. Goo was just one way to tap into these hidden forces and use them for good, or more likely evil.
It's like they saw the whole world as a giant mystical battery, and goo was a way to short-circuit it for their own benefit. But didn't they have any ethical qualms about messing with these forces?
Well, the source is actually pretty silent on the moral implications of using goo. It's presented more as a neutral force, like fire. It can cook your food or burn your house down, depending on how you wield it.
So a morally ambiguous magical tool. Sounds dangerous.
Very much so. And the source hints that the practice was often shrouded in secrecy and viewed with suspicion, even fear. Goo masters were often marginalized, seen as practitioners of dark arts.
Makes sense. If you believe someone can unleash venomous insects and bad luck with a flick of their wrist, you're probably going to want to keep them at arm's length.
Indeed. But that secrecy also added to the mystique and allure of goo. It became this forbidden knowledge, whispered about in hushed tones, passed down through secret lineages or apprenticeships.
So like a secret society of curse-wielding sorcerers. That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
But what motivated people to learn goo in the first place?
Well, the source suggests a range of motives: revenge, protection, even ambition. Some might have used it to settle scores, others to ward off perceived threats, and some might have seen it as a path to power and influence.
So not just black and white, but shades of gray, driven by all the usual human desires and anxieties. It's almost relatable in a morbidly fascinating kind of way.
Right. Goo might seem like a relic of superstitious past, but the motivations behind it are still very human. And that's what makes it so interesting to explore.
I'm starting to see goo less as a supernatural phenomenon and more as a reflection of human nature itself. All the jealousy, ambition, and fear that drives us, but with extra venomous insects thrown in for good measure.
Exactly. And speaking of those venomous insects, I think it's time we delve into the actual process of creating goo, as described in the source material.
Okay, I'm ready for it. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of ancient Chinese black magic. What exactly did these goo masters have to do to conjure up these curses?
Well, it wasn't for the faint of heart, that's for sure. It was a multi-layered process that involved specific ingredients, intricate rituals, and a whole lot of patience.
I'm guessing Amazon Prime wasn't an option back then. What kind of ingredients are we talking about?
Well, as we discussed earlier, venomous creatures were the foundation of goo. But it wasn't just about throwing them all together in a jar and hoping for the best. The source mentions a whole range of additional ingredients, each chosen for its specific symbolic or spiritual properties.
Okay, so a recipe for disaster. But with a touch of mystical flair, what kind of extra ingredients are we talking about?
The source mentions things like specific herbs, minerals, even pieces of clothing or hair from the intended victim. Each element was thought to enhance the goo's potency and direct its power toward a specific target or outcome.
It's like a mystical stew, brewed with ill intentions and seasoned with a dash of creepy. What about those rituals? I'm picturing chanting, incense, and maybe a few sacrificial chickens.
You're not far off. The source describes elaborate rituals involving specific incantations, gestures, and offerings to appease or manipulate the spirits associated with goo. These rituals were meant to imbue the goo with power and direct it towards its intended victim.
So it's not just about the ingredients. It's about the intention and the ritualistic energy put into the creation process. It's starting to sound less like cooking and more like a dark art performance. But didn't all this take a long time?
It was definitely not a quick process. Remember those specific time frames we mentioned earlier? Those were crucial to the creation of Goo. The source explains that the ingredient had to be left to interact and ferment for specific periods. 49 days. 100 days. Sometimes even a year. In order for the goo to reach its full potency.
So like a mystical slow cooker, simmering with resentment and venomous intent. What were they doing during all that waiting? Just twiddling their thumbs and hoping for the best?
Not at all. Those daily prayers we discussed earlier weren't just a formality. They were seen as an essential part of nurturing and guiding the goo's development, imbuing it with the practitioner's will and directing its power towards the intended target.
So it's like a twisted form of parenting. You create this spiritual parasite, feed it your darkest desires, and then unleash it upon the world. Talk about commitment. But all this talk about creation and rituals is making me wonder about the Go masters themselves. What kind of people were drawn to this practice?
That's a question that has fascinated scholars and storytellers for centuries. Who were these individuals who dared to delve into the shadowy realm of goo? Were they driven by malice, ambition, or perhaps a desire to understand the hidden forces of the universe?
I'm picturing a mix of mad scientists, power-hungry sorcerers, and maybe a few misunderstood healers who just happen to specialize in the darker side of magic. What insights did you glean from the source?
The sauce doesn't offer any psychological profiles of Go masters, unfortunately, but it does hint that they were often individuals who existed on the fringes of society, feared and respected in equal measure. They were seen as possessing both profound knowledge and a dangerous power that could be used for good or evil.
So like rogue wizards, operating outside the rules of conventional society. I guess that makes sense, given the taboo nature of their craft. But it also raises the question of how they acquired their knowledge. Was there some sort of Goo Academy where aspiring sorcerers could hone their skills?
Sadly, no Hogwarts for Go masters. The source suggests that their knowledge was often passed down through family lineages or secret apprenticeships, making it an exclusive and closely guarded tradition.
So it's like a mystical trade secret, passed down from generation to generation. It definitely adds to the allure and mystique of Goo, but it also makes me wonder about the risks involved. Were there any dangers for the Goo masters themselves?
Oh, absolutely. The source is full of cautionary tales about Goo masters who fell victim to their own creations, either through carelessness or hubris. It seems that wielding such power came with a heavy price.
So it's like playing with fire, or venomous insects, as the case may be. You might get burned, or worse, if you're not careful. What kind of dangers did they face?
Well, the source mentions things like the goo turning on its creator, the spiritual backlash from inflicting harm on others, and even the risk of attracting unwanted attention from malevolent spirits. It seems that the world of goo was fraught with peril, even for those who claimed to control it.
It's a reminder that even in the realm of magic and curses, there are consequences for our actions, and that sometimes the pursuit of power can lead to our own undoing.
Indeed. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of goo, the concept of counter-curses and defenses against these dark arts.
Okay, so we've learned how to create Goo, the risks involved, and now we're going to learn how to protect ourselves from it. This is like a magical self-defense class. I'm taking notes. What kind of defenses did people employ against Goo?
The source describes a variety of methods, ranging from simple talismans and amulets to elaborate rituals and exorcisms performed by skilled practitioners.
So like a mystical arms race.
Yeah.
You've got your offensive Go curses, and then you've got your defensive charms and incantations. Were these defenses effective? How did they supposedly work?
That's where things get a bit hazy. The source is more focused on the creation and effects of goo, but it does suggest that these defenses aimed to either repel the goo's energy, neutralize its power, or redirect it back to its source.
So like a mystical game of ping pong, with curses flying back and forth. What about those who didn't have access to these elaborate defenses? Were they just sitting ducks?
Not necessarily. The source mentions some more general protective measures, like strengthening one's own spiritual energy through meditation, cultivating positive karma through good deeds, and seeking the protection of benevolent spirits or deities.
So it's like boosting your spiritual immune system to fight off those nasty Goo vibes.
What about those who couldn't afford a fancy exorcism or a trip to the temple? Any DIY protection tips?
Well, the source suggests that even simple things like maintaining a clean and harmonious home environment, avoiding contact with suspicious individuals, and staying aware of your surroundings could help ward off negative energy and potential Goo attacks. So basically good hygiene, common sense, and a healthy dose of paranoia. Got it. But I'm curious, Did the source offer any insights into how to identify if you've been cursed with goo? What were the telltale signs?
That's a tricky one. The source emphasizes the elusive nature of Go, making it difficult to diagnose. But it does list some symptoms that were often attributed to goo curses.
Okay, give me the spooky checklist. What should I be on the lookout for?
Well, sudden and unexplained illnesses, persistent bad luck, nightmares, personality changes, and even social isolation were often seen as potential signs of a goo curse.
So basically, if your life suddenly starts resembling a bad horror movie, you might want to consider the possibility of goo. But wouldn't that make it easy to blame any misfortune on a curse, even if it had a perfectly natural explanation?
Exactly. It's one of the things that made goo so insidious. It played on people's fears and uncertainties, making it easy to attribute any setback or misfortune to a hidden malevolent force.
It's like the ultimate scapegoat. When in doubt, blame the good. But what if you suspected you were being targeted by a good master? What could you do to protect yourself?
The source is a bit vague on that, unfortunately. It focuses more on the general principles of good and its effects, rather than on specific strategies for dealing with a good master. But I think we can extrapolate some potential approaches based on what we've learned so far.
Okay, let's brainstorm. What would a good defense strategy look like?
Well, firstly, it would involve strengthening your own spiritual defenses, as we discussed earlier. Meditation, positive actions, and seeking spiritual guidance could all help bolster your resilience against negative energies.
So like a mystical workout routine for your soul. Got it. What else?
Secondly, it would involve being cautious and aware of your surroundings, avoiding contact with suspicious individuals, being mindful of any unusual gifts or offerings, and generally trusting your intuition could help you avoid potential good traps.
Okay, so common sense and a healthy dose of skepticism. Makes sense. Anything else?
The source also hints that confronting a goo master directly could be risky, as it could provoke retaliation, however. It does mention that certain individuals possess the knowledge and power to challenge goo masters and neutralize their curses.
So like goo-busting vigilantes. That's pretty badass. But where would you even find someone like that? Were there mystical classified ads back then? Seeking skilled goo exorcist. Must be proficient in counter curses and spirit banishment. Competitive salary and benefits.
I doubt it was that straightforward. The source suggests that such individuals were often hermits, monks, or spiritual practitioners who lived secluded lives, dedicating themselves to mastering the arts of healing and protection. Finding them would likely involve a perilous journey, a quest for knowledge and protection in the face of a hidden threat.
Sounds like the plot of a fantasy novel.
Hmm.
But hey, if you're dealing with ancient Chinese black magic, a bit of adventure is probably par for the course.
Indeed. And speaking of adventure, I think we've covered a lot of ground in part 2 of our Goo deep dive. We've explored historical anecdotes, the cultural context of these beliefs, the intricacies of creating Goo, and the various defenses people employed against these dark arts.
It's been a wild ride so far. We've gone from being creeped out to being cautiously fascinated by this whole goo thing.
And remember, we're only scratching the surface of this vast and complex subject. There's still much to uncover and understand about the world of Goo.
Welcome back to the final part of our goo deep dive. I have to say, this journey into ancient Chinese black magic has been way more fascinating than I expected, even if it has given me a few nightmares along the way.
It's certainly a topic that challenges our modern sensibilities, but that's part of what makes it so compelling. It forces us to confront a worldview where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were blurred, and where the power of belief was a force to be reckoned with.
Exactly. It's like looking through a distorted mirror, seeing our own fears and desires reflected back at us in this strange and unsettling way. But before we wrap up our exploration of goo, I wanted to revisit something we touched upon earlier. The idea of money as a spiritual conduit.
Ah, yes. The concept that money can absorb and transfer misfortune, making it both a potential source of wealth and a vector for curses. It's a belief that runs deep in many cultures, and it certainly adds a layer of complexity to our relationship with wealth and material possessions.
I know, right? It makes you think twice about that lucky penny you find on the street. But the source goes even deeper, suggesting that this belief might explain some seemingly superstitious practices that persist to this day.
Absolutely. Think about traditions like throwing coins into wishing wells or offering money at temples. Are these just harmless rituals? Or are they subtle forms of mini-goo that we engage in without even realizing it?
Whoa, that's a mind-blowing thought. So every time I toss a coin into a fountain, I could be unknowingly transferring my bad luck to the next person who scoops it up.
It's a possibility, isn't it? Of course, the intention behind these actions is important. If you're throwing a coin into a well with a genuine wish for good fortune, perhaps the energy is different than if you're trying to offload your bad luck onto someone else.
Okay, so maybe it's all about intention and mindfulness,
Yeah.
even when it comes to seemingly mundane things like spare change. But I'm curious about how this concept of money as a spiritual conduit played out in ancient China. Do they have specific rituals or practices related to money and goo?
Well, the source mentions a practice called Jin Chan, which translates to golden toad or money toad. It's a mythical creature that's often depicted with three legs and a coin in its mouth, believed to attract wealth and prosperity.
Hold on, a three-legged toad that spits out money. That sounds straight out of a fairy tale.
It does, doesn't it? But the Jin Chan was, and still is, a popular symbol in Feng Shui and Chinese folklore. People would place statues or amulets of the Jin Shan in their homes or businesses to attract wealth and ward off financial misfortune.
So it's like a goo-adjacent good luck charm. But how does this tie into the whole money as a spiritual conduit idea?
Well, the Jin Chan was believed to have the power to absorb negative energy and transform it into positive energy, attracting wealth and good fortune in the process. It's almost as if it's acting as a filter, purifying the spiritual energy associated with money.
That's pretty cool, actually. It's like having a mystical financial advisor who also happens to be a three-legged toad.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, this whole concept of Go and its various offshoots is still pretty mind-boggling. It's like a hidden world operating beneath the surface of our everyday lives, influencing our fortunes and misfortunes in ways we might never fully comprehend.
It's a reminder that there's still so much we don't know about the world, both seen and unseen, and that sometimes the line between belief and reality is more fluid than we might think.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on. This deep dive into you has been a real eye-opener, challenging my assumptions and expanding my understanding of the world in ways I never expected. I want to thank you, our expert, for guiding us through this fascinating, if slightly terrifying, subject.
It's been my pleasure, and remember, dear listener, even if we dismiss the literal existence of Gu, the beliefs surrounding it offer valuable insights into the human condition, our enduring fascination with the unknown, and the power of our own thoughts and intentions to shape our reality.
Absolutely. So the next time you find yourself wishing on a star, tossing a coin in a fountain, or just feeling a pang of envy at someone else's good fortune, take a moment to consider the subtle energies you might be putting into motion. You never know what ripples they might create in the vast and mysterious web of existence.
And perhaps a healthy dose of skepticism and a focus on cultivating your own positive energy are the best defenses against any potential spiritual pitfalls, whether ancient curses or modern-day anxieties.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our good deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And until next time, stay curious, stay open-minded, and maybe keep a three-legged toad statue handy just in case.